All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, so this is going to be chapter six, lecture six from unit one. This is the public choice perspective. So we're going to go through some of the uh, econometric approach. We're going to do a little bit of game theory, that kind of stuff. Okay. The public choice perspective by Andy Whitford. Section 6.1 is the intro, and they ask, what is public choice theory? And their definition here says it uses the tools of econ to understand why politicians and the people who elect them do what they do when they make decisions about government, what government will or will not do, right? So basically, it's just an economic approach to understanding political behavior, okay? A couple of assumptions made in economics, sort of Homo economicus, right? First, it's about utility maximization. Now, that gets squishy when we talk about what is an individual's utility and how do they maximize it, right? How do we operationalize the benefits garnered? That's difficult, right? But that's what this is at its core. Um, Another assumption is that generally, well, at all times, unless they specify otherwise, each individual actor will act completely rationally to maximize their utility, right? Um, this also has some assumptions, and generally, one of those assumptions is that all participants, all individual actors, or players in a game or whatever it might be, have full and complete information at all times, right? And so this is an assumption that doesn't really play out well in the real world. But again, one of these assumptions of Homo economicus man, right? They want to maximize their own utility. They will always act in the rational way to do that. And they have generally full and complete information about the game. Okay. I would say, however, unlike in many markets, there is a feedback loop in political markets, right? Where participants learn from their mistakes or their losses or whatever it might be, and it feeds back constantly into their new interactions. And this can make things rather difficult. Furthermore, a little bit of a nuance is that in public choice theory or public policy theory, generally the cost benefit calculation is based on the group rather than the individual, which differentiates this a little bit, right? Um, how does the population benefit, or a particular group of the population benefit, right? Which can be different from an individual actor's utility maximization function. Okay, section 6.2, 6 questions and the canon. So they basically play out 6 different questions. We'll talk about the first 5. 1, why is there collective choice? Why do we even bother with this, right? And the basic answer comes in the fact that some actions, some outcomes can only have a beneficial outcome. This is difficult to explain. Some actions can only have a beneficial outcome through collective action, participatory action, etc., right? And so there are a couple different discussions and models and metaphors and analogies for this, right? One is what we call the tragedy of the commons. And this is just the idea that, like, think about a fishery, right? Um, you're a lobster fisherman in Maine, okay? There are a finite number of lobsters to be caught in Maine, and if you catch too many, it will degrade the population over time and potentially even make every lobster disappear, right? Um, However, if you think about an individual fisherman or fisher person's utility function, their utility function is to be maximized at all times. This means that they have an incentive to overfish, right? And collectively, when every single fisherman out there on the main waters has an incentive to overcollect, you are almost inevitably going to get a depletion of the population and perhaps even some sort of extinction event, right? And so, in a sense, in this context, the tragedy of the commons, you must have some sort of collective action and some overriding governance body to determine what is a proper amount of fishing, right? What is an effective amount of fishing that can not only provide jobs, but can also, in the long run, ensure the long-term stability of the fishery or the lobstery or whatever it might be called, right? Um, so that's just an example of where like individual action can be devastating, right? Another example and sort of metaphor that is often put forth is the prisoner's dilemma, right? Two robbers get caught, they're put in separate rooms. If they can somehow cooperate and neither one of them tells on the other or themselves, then they'll only get 1 year in prison each, right? If they both tell, you get 6 years in prison each. But if one keeps his mouth shut and the other tells, the one who tells gets no jail time, and the one who held his ground gets 10 years prison time, right? This is just a 4-box configuration of how two players can take one of two choices, and the only way that they can both minimize their losses in this case, I mean, really, you can't even benefit, is through cooperation, right? And so, as an individual actor, each of them has an incentive to tell on the other. And invariably, generally, this means that they both get 6 years because, as individual actors, they're going to tell and they're going to tell on each other, and everyone's going to fail, right? Um, but if they can both somehow figure out a way to keep their mouths shut, they will both maximize their sort of utility overall, right? So there are a lot of different ways, right? Another one, and I just wanted to kind of bring this to real life, right, is a marriage, a compromise in your marriage. Um, Dad, we have to decide what we're having for dinner on our Valentine's date or something, right? Okay. And so dad wants steak, mom wants spicy Thai food. Um, we would both get our maximum benefit if we got our own choice. But the other would pay the worst cost if we got our own choice. And so we compromise, and instead of steak or spicy Thai food, we have Italian, right? And like maybe we don't both maximize our individual utility or benefit, whatever it might be. But overall, as a society or a partnership or a marriage, we both get some marginal benefit rather than somebody getting what they want and the other one paying the price, right? So these things can play out in the real world all the time. And they say, quote, in sum, public choice theory sees a need for collective choice, but also envisions collective choice as fraught with opportunities for individuals to subvert the collective process for their own ends. And this is why you tend to need a governing structure, whether that be a literal government or some kind of compromising rule structure or whatever it might be, is because there are incentives for cheating, right? This is the whole reason the whole system exists in the first place. So there are even if you hate governments, there are reasons why government can be necessary and vital sometimes, right? All right. Number two, do we even need politicians? Their big point here is that like unanimity is impossible. For the most part, functionally at least, direct democracy would also be nearly impossible. There are the costs, there are the technical details that need to be worked out that most citizens just don't have any knowledge of. And then there are some subjects that are just touchy, and you arguably don't even want your citizens to have knowledge of them, right? Like military procurement or CIA espionage outfits or national security concerns or the technical details and positioning of nuclear weapons, right? Like there are things that like the average everyday citizen just should not even have access to this sort of information, right? At least there's an argument to be made for it, right? Because if every American citizen has access to our nuclear weaponry engineering plans, it's going to slip out, right? Okay. Part three. What happens when we have politicians, right? And this is kind of an interesting econometric argument that was developed by not only like Nobel Prize winner Kenneth Arrow, but also Anthony Downs. I think it was 1957. Median voter theorem and things of this sort. Some really foundational stuff in the literature. And median voter theorem basically is just a description of how politicians will act given first past the post electoral systems, right, which is what we run in the United States. They also are known as plurality systems or majoritarianism, or, there's a lot of different names for them, but, it's not a proportional representation system like you would see in, I don't know, say Germany, right, or um, many of the sort of Scandinavian countries where each piece of the ideological spectrum is represented by small parties, and all you need is a fraction of the vote to get seating in the legislature. But in the U.S., I mean, basically one person comes out of every district, right? There is no proportional representation. And so the idea here is that politicians, under these SMD rules, single member district rules, will always be fighting for the median voter, right? Especially in a general election where you need 50% plus one. So you want to ideologically position yourself in the center and try to push your opponent to one side or the other of the ideological spectrum. However, this is not all that applicable anymore, especially given the combination of gerrymandering and primaries coming together, right? Gerrymandering means that you no longer have to worry about a general election. You only mostly have to worry about a primary election, right? Um, and you basically can't get out weirded in a primary election, so you're incentivized to put some extremist off the wall shit out there as a politician, right? So you can win your primary electorate. But that means that like there's really no incentive for you once you get through your primary to be a median voter theorem politician, right? You don't need that. There's no need for you to be a centrist, right? Like as long as you pass your primary, there's no way in hell Lubbock, Texas is going to vote the Democratic opponent, right? And so this is doing weird things to our politicians' incentive structures. Okay. Question 4. What do we do about public goods? They bring up Thibault, 1956, some really famous stuff on sort of districts trying to woo citizens to come move there. This idea of moving with your feet. so that you can either minimize your tax burden or maximize your public goods, right? And it's, there's evidence for this theory for sure, but there are some issues with it. First, it again assumes this idea of like full information and that people are constantly trying to update themselves on local district tax reforms and all this stuff so that they can quickly pick up and move to a new district. I mean, it doesn't really work that way. That's kind of a silly way to visualize things. It's also rather assumptive about people's ability to even do that, right? Like you have to be middle class or above to be even able to conceptualize just picking up your everything and moving to a new state, district, city, whatever it might be, right? And so, on the aggregate level, we do see some signals of this, but I think it's a little bit overplayed, and it's really hard to find evidence for this, at least broad evidence for this at sort of the micro level. So I would say just be careful. Question 5. What should society want, right? And they basically break down 3 different strands of debate, many of which are sort of rooted in this idea of conceptualizing yourself as a random citizen, right? And so the first sort of lens through which we see this is the justice lens from John Rawls' Theory of Justice, incredibly famous and thoughtful book. If you are interested in ethics and especially public policy ethics, I would absolutely suggest that you read this at some point. But he basically just says, like, let's play a thought experiment, right? How would you set up a constitution and a government if you were born as just a random citizen and had no idea where you would end up on the socioeconomic spectrum? And I mean, you know, uh, statistics and probabilities say you'll probably be middle class or poor, right? Like random likelihood says you're probably not going to be one of the wealthy, right? And so when you sort of sit through this thought experiment, Rawls suggests that it says that we, put up social welfare systems, we try to make everything as at least procedurally just and equal as possible. Maybe we even consider greater redistribution of wealth, all of these sorts of things, right? Bullock and Tullock in 1962 sort of touch on this same concept, right, of the thought experiment, uncertainty about where you'll be in the future on the socioeconomic spectrum, right? And they say that, given this, we should build a constitution that protects welfare over a long period of time. Because again, you're probably just going to end up as one of the average citizens and not somebody ultra wealthy or something like that. And so, from that perspective, you should probably want to build some protections into the Constitution, right? Okay, and then the third is about the quality of social welfare functions, and this is where some of Kenneth Arrow's way above my head econometric work is done, right? Arrow won the Nobel Prize for his econometric work in multiple realms of public policy, on voter theorem, on the philosophies of democracy. I mean, this dude was brilliant, right? Um, but he basically says like there are 5 functions of a social welfare policy or state that have to be considered, and it is literally impossible to fulfill all 5 functions simultaneously. In some sense, every policy will fail one of these assumptions, right? And that's troubling for Arrow. But he basically says that we have five functions. The first, the welfare function should allow for any possible set of individual preferences. So we've talked about that, where a lot of the sort of preference structure gets just completely wiped away because of the people who run, what are we even going to legitimize as a thought or a policy? Number two, welfare function should be Pareto efficient. So this touches on Pareto optimization. This just basically means that we're going to try to maximize our utility function. There's an incredible movie about John Nash who wrote about Nash equilibriums called, I think it was called A Beautiful Mind, and sort of how brilliant he was economically and philosophically, and then he collapsed into psychosis and these sorts of things. But this Pareto efficiency or Nash equilibriums just means sort of an optimization. Um, Number three, functions should be consistent and transitive, right? Like the math should work either way. The transitive properties should be in place. Number four, any decision should be non dictatorial. No single person should be able to overrule all other preferences, right? And then number five, any preferences over irrelevant options should not be able to affect the choice between two other alternatives. And this is sort of a nuance and a weirdness of the games that get played in economics, is that sometimes when you just insert a random and irrelevant option, it fucks everything up, and there becomes no equilibrium. And Arrow is basically saying, look, we have to. That can't happen for public policy to be just or right or whatever, right? Okay. I think that's all I've got for you on this chapter. I will see you for chapter 7 here shortly.